Breaking developments on a major crime bust right here in Cleveland. A violent gang has been brought down after a massive operation by local, state, and federal law enforcement.
Yeah, we're talking RICO, racketeering charges that involve murder, assault, kidnapping, and drug distribution. Say drugs were sold right here in this very vicinity like an open-air market. They also told us that the alleged kingpin of this gang called himself the Godfather.
There is a specific kind of quiet that settles over a neighborhood when it is ruled by fear. In the Cedar Central neighborhood on Cleveland's east side, hard-working families go about their daily lives. Kids walk to school, parents wait for the bus in the biting wind off Lake Erie. But for over a decade, the ground they walked on was treated as sovereign territory by a violent syndicate. An open-air drug market operated right under the glow of the streetlights. Lookouts watched the corners. The grassy lot next to the 28th Street liquor store wasn't a place for neighbors to gather. It was a designated point of sale for synthetic poison. But the men running this market were not a disorganized crew of corner boys. They were a highly structured, heavily armed enterprise operating on a grand scale. They called themselves the Fully Blooded Felons, and for years, they held Northeast Ohio in a vice grip. To understand the Fully Blooded Felons, you have to look behind the razor wire. The gang, often abbreviated as the FBF, emerged around 2012 as a ruthless offshoot of the Heartless Felons, a sprawling criminal network that had long plagued the Ohio penal system. But the FBF didn't just want to be another prison gang, they wanted a monopoly. At the top of this hierarchy sat a man named Raven Mullins. Mullins wasn't just a shot caller, he was the architect of an empire. He adopted the self-proclaimed title of Godfather. Under his direction, the FBF abandoned the chaotic, disorganized structure typical of street gangs and modeled itself directly on La Cosa Nostra, the Italian Mafia. They established a commission. Below the commissioners were the capos, senior members who ran the streets and the cell blocks. They demanded total allegiance. Members didn't just hang out, they were indoctrinated. They were forced to memorize and recite a strict code of conduct known as the Fully Five. At mandatory meetings, if a member answered a question about the Fully Five incorrectly, they faced severe physical beatings. And above all, they swore an oath to omerta, the absolute, unbreakable code of silence. For the Godfather and his commission, this structure served one purpose: to insulate the leadership while the soldiers flooded the streets with narcotics. With their hierarchy locked in place, the Fully Blooded Felons expanded their footprint. Cleveland was their capital, but their reach quickly extended into Akron, Youngstown, and deep inside the Ohio State prison system. They established two heavily fortified stash houses inside the Cedar Estates apartment complex. From these apartments, capos directed subordinate members to the streets, selling staggering quantities of cocaine, methamphetamine, and fentanyl. They were organized, they were efficient, and they were wildly profitable. But a criminal empire built on discipline requires violence to maintain it. As the FBF grew richer, they grew bolder. To protect their territory and their profits, the gang utilized kidnapping, arson, and armed robbery. Then, on September 12, 2023, the violence reached a boiling point. On the west side of Cleveland, an orchestrated hit took place. According to federal indictments, Raven Mullins, the Godfather himself, alongside high-ranking members Henry Burchett and James Clemens, executed a victim in cold blood. To cover their tracks, they fled the scene in a stolen vehicle. Minutes later, the vehicle was found entirely engulfed in flames, and the evidence was burned to ash. It was a statement of absolute impunity, but it was also the beginning of the end. While the FBF thought their code of silence made them untouchable, a massive, multi-agency net was quietly tightening around them. The FBI's Safe Streets Gang Task Force, the ATF, the DEA, and the Cleveland Division of Police had been watching. For 2 years, federal agents mapped the gang structure. They tracked the flow of fentanyl pills coming from out of state. They monitored the communications, directing the smuggling rings inside federal detention centers. They weren't just building a drug case, they were building a RICO case, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, the same federal statute used to dismantle the real Mafia. In December 2023, the hammer finally fell. Tactical teams breached doors across Northeast Ohio. By April 2024, a superseding indictment had brought the true scope of the enterprise to light. And by December of that year, 18 leaders, members, and associates of the Fully Blooded Felons were formally charged.
Authorities say they've been flooding our streets with fentanyl, meth, and other deadly drugs. And that's not all.
The Fully Blooded Felons resorted to the worst kinds of violent acts, including murder, kidnapping, assault, and robbery.
Stash houses, torture, guns, and drugs. This organized crime ring has been operating right under our noses.
They were modeling themselves and using the kind of terms, as you put it, that you would see in a movie.
But just like in those movies, their empire has come crashing down. RICO laws let prosecutors go after the whole gang, including the leaders, even for crimes that they didn't personally commit. And again, this was a 2-year comprehensive investigation that included multiple agencies. We're talking state, federal, and local level. In Cleveland, I'm Gabby Hart.
Agents seized hundreds of grams of fentanyl, bags of methamphetamine, and a massive arsenal of illegally possessed firearms. The Godfather, Raven Mullins, along with his capos and soldiers, found themselves facing charges of murder in aid of racketeering, kidnapping, and conspiracy. The empire that had terrorized the Cedar Central neighborhood had been decapitated in a single, coordinated strike. Today, the leaders of the Fully Blooded Felons sit behind bars, awaiting a justice system they thought they could outsmart. The FBI declared that Cleveland's most significant gang threat had been dismantled. But the removal of an empire leaves behind a fractured landscape. For over a decade, the residents of the Cedar Estates had to navigate their daily lives around an open-air drug market. Children learned to recognize the sound of gunfire before they learned to ride a bike. Families watched as addiction and violence hollowed out their streets. The takedown of the FBF is a massive victory for law enforcement, but it is also a grim reminder of how deeply organized crime can root itself in forgotten neighborhoods. It forces us to ask, how does a syndicate operate so openly for so long before the net finally closes? The Mafia of Cedar Central is gone, the stash houses are empty, but the scars they left on the community remain, a heavy, silent testament to a decade of manufactured power and the devastating cost of a poisoned city. If you found this video interesting, I recommend subscribing to the channel, liking this video, and clicking on the next video on this screen.